If you've been here before, you know that I like to preach with the book open. And what that does is it allows you to kind of find your own voice amidst concepts to be interpreted. So everybody grab an Eitz Chaim. Everyone grab an Eitz Chaim and go to the beginning of the Parsha, page 918. And as you hold the Eitz Chaim, for a moment, put it in your lap and take out the program for Charlie's bar mitzvah. And I want you to take a look right in the middle at this thing that Charlie talked about. But unless you see it and experience it, you don't get how powerful it is. Shalom, which means peace, with the broken vav. And I'm going to build on Charlie's drash, his interpretation. But before I do that, I'm going to share that I had a first-time experience in my life yesterday. I said to a mother of a bar mitzvah, I pray that you don't give birth tomorrow. I've never said that before. Now, you should all know we actually moved the date of this given your due date. So, yay, you're here. And I loved Rabbi Ilana's beautiful blessing of you that when you are blessed with a beautiful child, we will all feel that blessing. You know, we use certain words a lot, and they're important words. But then when we try to say, can I define that word? We realize it's not so easy. So I want you to be talking to me later today, and then when you go home, I want to know what the word peace means. What is peace? And I promise you that several of the ways that people often will explain it, I don't think are correct. Peace is not avoiding conflict. And often that's what people think it is. Peace is not a sense of calm, although it may involve that. I want to suggest today that peace is really complicated. It's difficult to achieve and to maintain. And it may be that this detail that you're looking at, the broken vav in the word shalom, may be one of the best ways for us to start to grapple with what peace might mean to us. Why was Pinchas given this brit shalom? This covenant of peace. And what does that tell us about what peace is and how we find it in our lives, how we might find a brit shalom? And Charlie gave you the background, but it's worthwhile to review it. Sometimes you have to hear things another time. If you go to last week's portion, at the very end of the portion, you see that we are a society in crisis. We were amidst the Midianites, and we were pulled in to their practices. Their idolatry felt very compelling. Not only were the Israelites worshiping the Midianite gods, they were engaged in all kinds of sexual debauchery. And suddenly a plague bursts out. But the plague was not enough to stop the Israelites. Sometimes we don't even realize the causalities that are occurring. And at that moment, something utterly shocking happens. Like if you didn't read it in the story, you'd say, nah. An Israelite leader, Zimri, comes with a Midianite woman, Cosby, and they begin to have sexual relations in front of the tent of meeting. Now you got to know the tent of meeting is the most holy place. It's the place that can tolerate no impurity. It's the place where God dwells. It's the place where we bring offerings. How shocking that such an act would take place amidst plague. Pinchas immediately grabs a spear. By the way, think about that spear and the letter Vav. He drives the spear through the stomachs of Zimri and Cosbi, and they die, and suddenly the plague abates. And so if you're reading the story in its contextual way, you're saying, wow, it was his act that may have caused the plague to abate. Then the portion ends. It's almost as if whoever divided this into portions needed there to be a break between this act and the beginning of the next week's portion. So now we're at our portion. And I want you to see, we're on page 918. Is everybody there? God says to Moses, Pinchas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron. So we learn that he is the grandson of Aaron, Moses, the son of Aaron, Moses' nephew. Very important person. The priest has turned back my wrath from the Israelites by displaying amongst them his passion for me. The word for passion is kinah, jealousy, anger, so that I did not wipe out the Israelite people in my anger. God seems to be utterly blessing him. And now look at this next line. Lachen, therefore, I grant him my pact of friendship. It's for him and his descendants after him, a pact of priesthood for all time, because he took impassioned action for God, thus making expiation for the Israelites. This is one of those where translation matters. I gave him a pact of friendship. I know not everybody speaks Hebrew, but if you go over to the Hebrew side of the text, the word that Charlie talked about, I give him a brit shalom. How would you translate that? A covenant of peace. It's different than a covenant of friendship. I give him a covenant of peace. And then Charlie explored, why does he need a covenant of peace? And your suggestion was that anytime you engage in an act of violence, even if it is justified, it takes something from you. And it's a response to his actions. And boy, does that open up doors for right now. If you do some act and it's justified, you needed to do it, but it involves something that's hurtful to another, takes the life of another, you need healing and restoration. You need a brit of shalom. But there are so many ways that we can understand that concept, brit shalom. Why is he given a brit shalom? And one of the things that Charlie discovered, and I love teaching this way, is that every question has so many answers. And it's less the rabbi telling you, this is how you understand brit shalom. And it's far more all of us saying, here's what a brit shalom is. Here's how I can find it. Here's how it relates to what happened to Pinchas. So question number one to you for us to talk about later and for you to talk about as you go through the week, what is peace? And as I explore the next question, I think I might touch upon that in my ways. But number two, what is a covenant of peace? And why was he then also given an eternal priesthood? The portion lifts up for me more questions than answers, which I love that Charlie understood. A lot of people have trouble with questions. They want binary, they want concrete, they want the answer. Sometimes sitting with the questions is more important than anything. But let me give you one answer. This is the answer of Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, 19th century rabbi. He says he's given this as a reward. The Brit Shalom is a reward. How is it a reward? It's a reward because peace gets confused with passivity. And when we're passive at a moment when we need to intervene, terrible things happen, like the worship of idols, permitting inexcusable immorality. For him, Pinchas's actions save the nation and actually restore peace, because for him, peace is being connected to and consistent with God's law. And if where you are is inconsistent with that, you'll never have true peace. And so as I'm sitting in a world fraught with conflict, I struggle with questions that say, might acts of self-defense, acts which respond to an evil which will persist if it's not in some way mitigated, might that actually be true peace? Might conflict be required for us to come to peace at times? And by the way, if you think I'm talking about what's happening in Israel and the Middle East, I am. I'm struggling with it, but I'm trying to bring this text to my struggling with what's happening right now. Rabbi Hirsch's interpretation allows me to say peace isn't avoiding conflict. Sometimes peace is the hard decisions you need to make in order to address what is underlying that which is eating and eroding society and culture and true peace. So I want to hold that as a possibility. He's given a covenant of peace because he did what was necessary in a time when others may not have understood it or liked it. Might that be what peace is? And then what amazes me is how tradition allows us to interpret in fundamentally different ways. And then the real struggle begins. And I want to suggest that sometimes peace means the capacity to sit with the discomfort of contrasting and conflicting truths. That might be what deeper peace is. So many commentators do exactly what Charlie explored, which is saying when you take a life, it injures, it impacts you. The Brit Shalom given to Pinchas acknowledges that he must have been torn up inside by what he felt he needed to do. And that the Brit Shalom is given to address the emotional unrest he must have been feeling. And so when I assess the world, when I look at places where people may have to fight for a righteous cause, I need to acknowledge the pain and trauma that's inflicted on the warrior so that we as a society can help address that emotional distress that is always present. By the way, it's not just the warrior. It's the person who takes the brave act of leaving. It's the person who says, this situation is toxic to me and I must get out of it. The leaving, the courage actually can cause so much distress. It's true. And the Brit Shalom is giving room to acknowledge that. And that to me is compelling. So Brit Shalom as the necessary acts that we need to do, according to Rabbi Hirsch, Brit Shalom as that which acknowledges the emotional turmoil that comes when you have to do something so difficult. But other commentators have a different paradigm. They say the Brit Shalom is actually acknowledging that there's a piece of his character that is contrary to Shalom. There's a piece of his character that has to change, especially if he's going to be the high priest. And so for me, the introspection is, are there pieces of me that can be anathema to peace? Do we sometimes go quick to rage and or anger? And might those pieces of us need to change? Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Berlin, a 19th century rabbi, teaches that it's given to Pinchas so that he should learn not to be so quick-tempered. And it fascinates me that so many commentators are so troubled by his act. It shouldn't trouble me, because zealotry can be dangerous. Who decides this is the time to act outside of the framework of the law? The rabbis were so concerned that he seemed to undermine the authorities at the time. Shouldn't he have gone to Moses and Aaron? That there was no judicial process, which there should always be before a life is taken, even if they've done terrible things. So might he have needed a corrective to that passion, which can be so important and so dangerous all at the same time? Now weave in the broken vav. So what is peace? What is the covenant of peace? Why is the vav broken? Why? Okay, you get a little bit more background. You get a little bit more background. We don't really know. We have a sense of when the Torah was compiled as a singular document. You know, tradition takes it all the way to Mount Sinai in the form that it was. Rabbi Akiva sees God putting little crowns on the letters. But we do know that there was a group of rabbis, of sages, called the Masoretes. And the Masoretes were 6th, 7th, 8th century. And they're the ones who decided what should each word be exactly. By the way, sometimes letters look similar. Dalas and resh. Is there a dala there? It's a resh there. They decided when sentences would end. They decided certain grammar things. They also are the ones who put the musical notation to how it should be chanted. And most people think that it wasn't until the time of the Masoretes, hundreds of years probably after this was accepted as a document, who put in that broken vav. Now, as with most people who write things like that, they didn't leave a little commentary. Here's why I wrote the broken vav. They almost leave it to us. Why did they do that? Now, to understand why that question so animates me, you need to know that if there's one little thing wrong in a letter, it invalidates the whole scroll. That, by the way, is why we use a yad, a pointer, because we don't want our finger oils to smudge a letter. Every single letter matters. By the way, that's a whole nother sermon, a great sermon. But it's, so you need to know that in any way making a letter defective is contrary to the rules of how the book should be written. Yet the Masoretes not only allowed for, they taught that when a scribe writes the Torah by hand, write this vav with a little gap in the middle. I actually want you to sit with the question. If I had more time, I'd have you talk to the person next to you. Why is the vav broken? Charlie gave such an interesting explanation. That when you do an act of violence, there's a piece of you that breaks. So the interpretation that said Brit Shalom is connected to what happens when you do violence. That's an interesting one. How do we help people who've had that brokenness because of what they've had to do heal? Maybe it's even acknowledging the brokenness that is real. Rabbi Chaim Ovadia gives two explanations, both of which mirror what we've talked about. He says, one, occasionally peace must be broken for a higher purpose. He gives a really different answer to why the broken vav. Similar to Rabbi Hirsch's, sometimes you have to break what we think is peace in order to have true peace. I think about that a lot. I think about that a lot because I don't want to rely on it too often, but I know that it needs to be spoken. His second explanation is that peace achieved through violence will always be incomplete. really building on what we talked about, that is true. We can't reduce this word, this concept that is actually the end of almost every Jewish prayer service, peace, shalom, to glib generalities. Peace is difficult. Peace is a very difficult thing to find. And it may be that that next line, I'm going to give you an eternal priesthood, is meant to guide Pinchas to rethink what he understands peace to be. If you're going to be the priest, and what is the priest? One of his main jobs is to bless the people to find peace. If you're going to be the vessel of giving peace, you have to start thinking in a different way. You have to make peace your essence. You have to seek peace in situations where it might seem unclear how to do so. You have to live peace. You have to be a vessel of peace. The broken Vav teaches me how elusive peace is, and that my job is to try to fill in the gap in the space. Okay, what happens is you start to see different explanations, is you come up with more and more and more. I want to hear 5 different explanations at Kiddush. Why the broken Vav? Because it's your interpretation of this that's way more important than this sermon. And then what does it mean to you and how do you live it? I'm going to give you 1 more. Okay, 2 more. A Vav goes straight up and down. Are you seeing the Vav there? Shalom. Straight up and down. So you've got to know a little bit about the Hebrew letter. And what do the rabbis do as they're interpreting this? They say, well, what the Vav does is it connects heaven and earth. The Vav connects heaven and earth. And then the aftermath of violence, where the connection between heaven and earth is severed, we need to rebuild that connection. And I have to tell you how powerful that is to me, because I don't think it's in any way surprising to hear me say our world is so fractured. The connection between heaven and earth feels severed in so many ways and getting worse. The disconnect and the anger and the rage that's part of the political reality of polarized anger at one another, that's part of America, is simply real. And so I get to look at that fractured Vav and say, that's what's going on right now. Why the fractured Vav? Because it describes the fracture that exists. And it's not just our country, it's certainly in the Middle East. That's what's real now. And our job is to connect heavens and earth and to fill in the gap a little bit. So what does that mean? It means we need to listen a little better. It means we need to stop demonizing. It means we need to get out of our echo chambers. It means we need to be aware that the algorithms that give us information are self-sustaining in terms of the ideas we believe. It means that we have to have more humility and develop the capacity to listen with heart and with soul. Because good listening is that which bridges worlds rather than destroys them. And it leads to richer outcomes rather than fear and anger, which are so prevalent. And so as I look at that broken Vav, I say my message is that we have to be vessels that fill in the gap between heaven and earth through how we behave and act. This tiny, little, unspoken detail speaks so loudly, and it helps us understand ourselves. Here's my last interpretation. As many of you know, I lost my beloved mother 2 weeks ago. And the broken Vav is me. I'm broken. And I know that brokenness is an essential part of life. I know that down the line, memories and inspiration from my mom will restore the sense of wholeness. Never completely, because when you have a loss, that brokenness, that sense of I am the broken Vav is always part of you. But it restores in all kinds of ways. I've watched with so many of you how it restores in unexpected ways. And as you pull from memory, you find paths towards restoration. My mother taught me that caring for others is the way to respond to brokenness. And that knowledge holds in it the seeds of wholeness amidst brokenness. We can be broken. It's part of life. It's how we respond to that brokenness that defines who we are. I've always loved the Midrash, that the broken tablets that Moses smashed when he saw the children of Israel worshiping idols were put into the ark as it traveled from place to place, right alongside the whole tablets that were rewritten. In brokenness are not just seeds of holiness, but they are holiness. They hold within it the capacity to learn, to grow. It reminds us brokenness is in fact holy. I'll conclude with one of my favorite poets, authors, and singers, Leonard Cohen. Leonard Cohen wrote a song called Hallelujah. It's a cold and broken hallelujah. 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 And in his song Anthem, he says, there's a crack in everything. That's how light gets in. This broken Vav is the crack that lets in light. It's the crack that lets us see and acknowledge our brokenness. It's the crack that it reminds us that our sacred task is to reconnect heaven and earth as we allow the light to pour into the blank space separating the top and the bottom of the Vav. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So I want to say to you, Charlie, one, your capacity to understand that study leads to so many insights is extraordinary. Your capacity to understand that holiness is struggling with questions